Good afternoon, everyone. We are two protons in a cloud. As you know, every week we're bringing you a live dialogue, digging into some of the industry news affecting the developer community, and we chat with our guests of the week on a topic we want to know more about. I'm Adrienne Kraft, one of your hosts and a technical evangelist for HPE Helion.
And hi, I'm Sujay Maheshwari, your second host, and I'm a dev evangelist at HPE Helion. Welcome.
So on the heels of DockerCon Europe, our episode today is focused on some of the questions on why everyone loves containers and Docker and why companies are embracing Docker, pretty much why it matters for the developer community.
Yep, and make sure you stick around for the full episode. And at the end of this episode, we'll be announcing our second winner for our hashtag, HPE Helion challenge. That means there's only 2 weeks left for the contest.
Excellent. But first, as always, our week's headlines. And we're keeping it short and sweet this week because we want to spend time with our guest. So the British government is going James Bond on cybercrime, maybe because I just watched the movie. But Chancellor George Osborne stated that new programs and $250 million in government funding will aim to boost cybersecurity defenses, so specifically investing in cybersecurity startups. The UK's public spending budget for fighting cybercrime will also double, and they're pitching 2020 win. Public online assets, hospitals, electricity grid infrastructures, all to fall under this new spending allocation. So,
right.
Interesting.
And did you like the movie, Adrienne?
So, to be perfectly honest, I fell asleep in the middle. I'm not going to say it was a bad movie. I think it was just too late of a show.
Oh, maybe you were tired or something. And this announcement comes only hours before Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, announces in Washington, D.C. that Windows is the most secure OS on the market. This is due to some of the additional protections of late, including, like facial recognition logins, protections from untrusted applications, and a vast intelligence network to evaluate the threats. The hub of this Cyber Defense Operations Center, part of $1 billion investment in security MSFT, will use to protect itself and the customers. Pretty cool.
And again, we're hitting with all the major players. Google, and Google's overall cloud boss, thinks that within the next 5 years, the company's Google Cloud Platform revenues could surpass their advertising revenue. So in a statement, they said the goal is for us to talk about Google as a cloud company, again, by 2020. So they said on stage at today's Structure conference in San Francisco. So this is pretty big news today.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah, because that would represent a huge transformation of Google's business, right? The internet company generated like 89% of its revenue from advertisers in 2014, primarily from the lucrative search ads that appears alongside with search engine. So that's a big transformation.
Mm-hmm.
So Adrienne, if you recall the AWS glitch in the late September, which we covered, the performance started collapsing and other APIs timed out. Services built on top of AWS started to fail, which meant customers could not access some sites, right? The biggest customer to come out of that story was Netflix. Well, now Netflix has announced that it has a new strategy, a tool called SpinNaker, which they call an open source multi-cloud, and I think we covered the multi-cloud thing a couple of episodes back. So it's an open source, multi-cloud, continuous delivery platform for releasing software changes with high velocity and confidence.
So Sujay, remind me and our viewers why this particular video streaming company is so important to the cloud.
Right. So that's a good question. So I mean, they partnered with all the big names in the cloud and support deployment like for AWS, Google Cloud, and the Cloud Foundry and Azure are in the works. Support for containers are also in the pipeline. So and you can get all the code from the GitHub. It's all open source.
Okay, so basically Netflix avoids the power dynamic of being solely reliant on AWS and can shop for a more competitive price advantage by utilizing a multi-cloud
Right,
strategy.
right. Both the price advantage as well as the resiliency, in the multi-cloud strategy. Yeah.
Awesome. So, and Sujay, since you commented on my grammar offenses earlier, because I have a love of run-on sentences, I'm calling for an app from our viewers that will cut my sentences into a more powerful and more concise statements. But I don't want to lose my dense and convoluted meaning. So I think that's our next app that we need to build.
Sure. We should run a contest around that
I think
after our
that's it.
contest gets over.
I think that's a great idea. It'll help me. So now we're going to transition and we're going to welcome Arun Jacob, our guest today. Arun is currently a Director of Product Management for HPE Helion Development Platform. His focus is actually on the marketplace service within the platform and also how to leverage the cloud for big data solutions. Previously, Arun was the Director of Data Solutions at Disney, happiest place on earth, leading a team of analysts and engineers. In the last decade, he's been leading teams, building systems that extract actionable information from massive unstructured data sets, and then bringing products to market to help enterprise engineering teams develop and deploy those cloud-native apps. So pretty much that sums up why he is a sought-after guest for our show. So thank you so much, Arun. We definitely owe you a good lunch.
Good.
So,
Good. That sounds like a fair trade.
yeah, so tell us a little bit about what gets you excited about your current role right now.
I think we're doing a lot of things to redefine and make it easier for enterprises to actually build applications that are really resilient without spending a lot of time without having them spend a lot of time thinking about building out that resiliency. And what that lets them do is focus on the things that actually differentiate them. So there's a lot of things in distributed software application development that are necessary but not necessarily sufficient for an application to succeed. And you have enterprises that are going head-to-head with small, very fast-moving startups, and they need to have a degree of resiliency that those startups don't necessarily need. Because the resiliency that they need actually affects their brand. So if a large enterprise, like let's say Coca-Cola, launched a new application, that application crashed, it would affect their brand. If a small startup comes up with something potentially disruptive, they're not held to the same degree of scrutiny, right? So enterprises they kind of get it from both ends, right? They have to move quickly, they have to keep up with potentially innovators and disruptors in their space, and they also need to be highly available in a way that those other disruptors and innovators may not be held to at first. So, our job is to provide them with the tooling to allow them to deliver these applications and really focus on what differentiates them, and that's their features.
Right. There's something interesting you said, right? If a large brand comes out with something and it crashes, people critic in a very bad way that, hey, such a big name couldn't build a simple app. Whereas if a startup and if their app crashes, it's a good thing. They would see VC lineup saying that, hey, listen, I think you are doing something really good and you are not able to scale. That's a good thing. So it's so different for both of these worlds. Totally, you got that right. So Arun, assuming that everybody knows Dockers, right, and what Docker containers are and all that good stuff, give us your take on the state of Docker ecosystem and particularly how it intersects with other systems out there. And again, particularly I'm looking at the PaaS ecosystem. So how is this all going on right now?
So I think Docker started out with a way to really conveniently package a bunch of different things together and then make that reproducible and then spin it up really easily, right? That's what we think of when we think of containers. And that the reason why you're starting to see an ecosystem around that, I think, is really because of what making things easy to package did to the entire software delivery chain, right? So when we talk about application packaging, prior to Docker, automating that was painful. A lot of people didn't automate it in their other environments, And a lot of times what you had was you had sort of a focus on the application, and the underlying dependencies and the OS that it ran on were kind of environmentally dependent. And so you'd have a developer running an application on their laptop, but that didn't match what was in test or prod or load. And we'd start to see a lot of thrashing and churn around that, where we'd get bugs that we couldn't reproduce because it didn't happen on my laptop, it didn't happen in dev, you know. And so you had this sort of really hard way to build your final bits, the things that you actually ship. And it was hard, it was manual, it was error-prone, environments diverged. Well, Docker has an answer for that, right? It's a reproducible image, and the changes you put into that image are auditable, right? You can actually track them. You can track them by looking at the state of the image in the registry. You can recompose things on top of existing images. So all of a sudden we have a Lego block way to do something that was really hard in the past, right? And I think, you know, when we talk about Docker, that's the important thing, because to me that actually opens up a lot of things, and it makes a lot of things that were nice in theory but hard to implement in reality actually much easier to implement. For instance, like a CI/CD system. You know, you can now build images, right? Instead of building the application bits and deploying them to an environment and still not necessarily understanding how that application behaves in production because you can't assure that the environment is there, you now have a way to deploy everything, right? And so it's deterministic, it's reliable, it's repeatable. You know, that to me is one of the biggest things, is that people have had Jenkins around forever, but you know, a lot of times people don't use Jenkins the way it should be, right, to assure quality at every stage. With Docker in the picture, you can assure quality because you have a deterministic way to see if a change that you've made in your underlying application dependency graph, right, has actually introduced a bug. The other thing that's interesting about Docker versus VMs, for instance, is the startup time. So where you would take minutes to actually relaunch an image, and that actually changes the way that you think about failover significantly. You now do it in seconds, and that really opens up the way that platforms as a service can actually provide resiliency. So those are things that Docker actually, you know, did and made really easy. And so those are things that are enabling side effects, right? But I look at software delivery as kind of a performance optimization problem. When you take out some hard things, other hard things come up.
Right.
So what has Docker made? What has Docker exposed that is also still really hard, right? That has been hard forever, and it almost just got harder because it's faster to get there, right?
Right.
So things like orchestration. How do we deploy applications where where they're composed of different container images that all need to land, hook up to a network, and talk to each other, right? How do we make that application addressable? How do we secure the application around the perimeter and set up the right networking so that only certain ports are exposed, right? Only certain routes are exposed. How do we scale these applications out? And what do we do when an application fails? And so there's this second level of concerns that you have when you're building a distributed application,
right,
that you have to address now. And you would have had to address it all the time, but honestly you were so busy trying to take care of some initial things that you never quite got there.
Right, right.
So that's where I think the PaaS layer comes in, and also where what people are starting to call the CAS layer, right? Container as a service layer comes in.
Right.
Is there needs to be a higher level of degree of things to help you build a distributed application on top of easy packaging and easy deployment and easy startup.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned the CAS, right? I was reading something yesterday, and this person in his blog, he's like, the PaaS sits along with the Docker, and you know it now encapsulates as another offering. So it's not like PaaS is eating Docker or Docker is eating PaaS kind of thing. They'll coexist together because they bring different things to the table kind of thing. And it was a very interesting blog post. You know, something similar what you mentioned. Pretty cool. Thank you.
So, I mean, I feel like, and this might be jumping a little bit ahead, but I feel like there are different layers in a layer cake, right? And so when we talk about containers and authoring containers, authoring container images and just deploying those, that's sort of like the raw infrastructure, right? And when we talk about something like CAS, we talk about the orchestration of
right,
groups of containers and maybe some some policy around replacing, with Kubernetes and pods, for example, saying if one of these goes down, bring it back up, right?
Right.
But PaaS brings a whole other layer that I think also is needed in certain classes of applications. So I see these things coexisting, and I see them being a choice and a spectrum of how much. It's almost like freedom versus convenience. If there's a spectrum of activities you can take, you may be constrained in how you develop an application, but in exchange for those constraints, you get a lot of things for free, like authentication, for instance, and logging and hierarchy, things that you need in an enterprise app. You may not need that in some applications. You may not need that in some data applications. So those could run in what people are starting to call the CaaS layer, right? The container as a service layer.
Right.
So there's not one to win. One doesn't win all, right? It's not like it's not a contest as much as it really is becoming the ecosystem.
True. Yeah, there's no one silver bullet to every problem which we have. So true.
Right.
And that really does kind of sum up the question that I was going to ask about, are we at that point where we have criteria for a developer to decide between Docker and a non-Docker based deployment? But it kind of seems like it really depends on the case.
So the thing I'd say, when you talk about should I use containers or not, is that it's not an or question. It's more like a when question, right? So if I'm writing the app to actually help you be grammatically more precise, which is, I guess, the next contest coming up, I'm probably not going to deploy that as a container because I don't need to. I don't need to deploy it into multiple environments. I could probably run it on my laptop and just push it out to a PaaS that I use because I'm the only one working on it, right? As my team scales and as the complexity of my application scales, I will want to adopt things that help me focus on features. And that's the role I see of containers. That's the role I see of things that we call a CaaS, like Kubernetes, and things that we call a PaaS, like, for instance, Cloud Foundry, is that they help me actually maintain my focus on delivering value by automating parts of my delivery pipeline and parts of how my application behaves under load and failure that I don't want to think about because I'd much rather be delivering features.
So there are a couple of questions coming to my mind, and I guess this is what I want to ask you now is 2 weeks back we were in Berlin at the Cloud Foundry Summit, and again a lot of Cloud Foundry, the whole PaaS and Docker thing was being discussed, and most of the thoughts resonated, or most of the people agreed that they will coexist. You talk to a lot of Docker fans, let me put it that way. Do those guys also believe something similar, that Docker will coexist with PaaS and they all will be part of the larger ecosystem, or do they think that Docker will replace most of the stuff because they are building their own stack and their own services and all that good stuff?
So when you look a little closer at things like Swarm, for instance, and Compose, and even the Docker control plane, Docker control plane is a little short on detail right now. It looks really interesting, right? But let's take Swarm and Compose, for instance. They don't quite provide enterprise-grade functionality, right, yet. When you go up the stack to something like Kubernetes, that's when you're starting to see, scale out and replacement and things like that. But you still don't provide things that Kubernetes still doesn't provide things like authentication, right? And it doesn't really have a clear a way to implement multi-tenancy. And there's no unified logging system underneath that makes it easy to aggregate logs. And these are things that keep applications up and running at scale, right? So when somebody says Docker is going to win all the way, the current state of all of these things is not quite there yet. That doesn't mean that they're not going to build it in. I think that there's some initial overlap between things like Kubernetes and Cloud Foundry, for instance, and Swarm might well come into that, right? But all of these, I think it really depends on what you are willing to implement, what you're willing to trade away. These are reasoned as engineering decisions, and there's pros and cons for each. There's pros and cons for writing a Cloud Foundry style application. There's pros and cons for writing a Kubernetes style application,
Right.
and there's pros and cons for ignoring all of that and just using containers to deploy your app with something like Compose. And as an engineer, our jobs are to understand those pros and cons and make the most reasonable decision to deliver value to our customer. So there's not an easy answer. There's not one to win all. One's going to win, and I just think it's an amazing ecosystem because every day you wake up, you read something new. There's a ton of overlap. There's a ton of things that are just kind of going in slightly or fairly congruent directions. This next year is going to be very interesting to see how those things mature.
Right. It reminds me of the whole when all these new languages like Ruby on Rails came, like whatever 2004, 3, 5, that time frame. It will be all Ruby. Like, oh, Java is so like unproductive. .NET is so unproductive. And then people realize that no, Ruby has its own issues. Scalability, and we very well remember the whole Twitter thing, which used to go down every like few days kind of thing. I think as developers and engineers, as you say, we have to evaluate what scenario are we talking about, what ecosystem we are trying to build, and then move from there and evaluate. So a couple of things you mentioned, and I want to have a quick question, and you partially answered this, what I'm going to ask you, but I still want to like complete that thing. It's what are the biggest challenges right now for a developer to go from a really hello world kind of an app built with Docker to a production ready app? Any examples you would think of, or any experiences you have?
So, authoring an application and putting it in an image and spinning it up is one step in a long journey, right? Yep. So when you talk about production, usually you're talking about providing an SLA. You're providing a certain level of uptime, right? And in an enterprise environment, because of some of the branding things that we talked about and perception of brand value, that SLA is usually very high. So this is really about how you make sure an application can basically stay up, right? Can scale out. How you, as introducing a version 1 application, can start to find that application's product to market fit by iterating really quickly. All of these things require a lot of effort that doesn't go into how you differentiate your application, which is really what makes your application survive, right? So there are a lot of solutions that currently in the Docker ecosystem and outside of the Docker ecosystem that do parts of that overall picture. And when we talk about some engineering decisions that you need to make, it is really what am I doing right now in this moment, right? So I may take an application, and in order to get that application funded in my own enterprise, I may demo it from my laptop, and that might be good enough, right? Yeah. Then I know that I need to take it to another level. The reason I keep coming back to this is that it's not a discrete spectrum. It's more like a gradual spectrum. What do you need to provide enterprise capabilities? When I wrote that application on my laptop, I was not thinking about integrating with LDAP.
Yep.
Do I have to create that from scratch, right? Those are the kind of things where you start to look to frameworks. And when you look to frameworks, you lose some flexibility. I can't just integrate to any LDAP in any old way. Yep. I have to do it a specific way, right? I can't just write my own logging system. I have to abide with the logging system of the paths that I'm in, right? Or maybe I do want to spend a bunch of time writing that logging system. But these are all business decisions that map down to technical decisions. So the hardest part of a developer taking something from something compelling on their laptop, which is probably not hello world, but something compelling, all the way out to production is for them to decide at what point, how hardened do they have to be at what point in the cycle, right? Because what they're trying to do always is get that product to market fit, and they may be able to get that without going to a completely hardened application. They might be able to. They may only be able to get that by going to that full scale, production grade application. This is very context dependent. I think the thing is that you have to understand the spectrum and the benefits you get and the trade-offs that you have to make in order to get those benefits.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Excellent. So, Arun, as we know, HPE announced the launch of HPE Helion Development Platform 2.0 at DockerCon Europe this week. Kind of want to get your thoughts on why this was such an important announcement for the Docker ecosystem.
I think it's an important announcement because it shows that it isn't all about things from Docker. It shows that the larger community sees the value in Docker. HDP is a platform as a service, and as a platform as a service, it provides things that you may miss in all the hype about CAS. Again, you do get orchestration and deployment and scale out and some failure resolution, but what about authentication and logging and multi-tenancy? Those are things that enterprises need. It shows that there isn't a black and white answer, but that these technologies actually are complementary. And in HDP as a specific example, we take what works, right? So we're built around Docker. We actually can deploy Docker images. We treat them as first-class citizens. And even in applications that we use and we build out with build packs, right, we're using Docker containers underneath to deploy those images. So, to me, it's a really good statement about how Docker is used, right? Docker, in one case, in the case where we're building the application out in the traditional Cloud Foundry way, is really an implementation detail, and it's an implementation detail that makes it much easier for us to deliver that application, right? On the other hand, being able to take someone else's Docker image and deploy it cleanly is something that shows that we understand the value of pre-existing images. We understand that, and we also with say Code Engine also are able to deliver those, build and validate and deliver those images. In addition to the traditional build and deploy cycle that we have with applications. So I think this is a reasonable and reasoned approach to using Docker, right? It's this, when we deliver this, it's not about let's go grab the latest technology. It's about let's go grab a technology that is open, that is proven, that actually accelerates our own development cycle. And you can see that in a lot of different products that are now starting to come out. Docker, in their case, is something in their implementation that helps them move faster and provide more resiliency, makes their application better. And that's definitely the case here. And that's what we do internally in our own implementation, but that's what we do when people deploy their applications to our product. By allowing Docker images as a first-class citizen, we understand Docker's role in the software delivery cycle.
Right, and I think you hit it perfectly. It's all about the speed for the developers, and then you still have those controls that IT need. So we're really excited about that, and our show will actually feature a demo of HDP 2.0 next week when you all need a break from the holiday family time. Okay,
all
so
right.
I want to give you two gentlemen a chance. Any final thoughts from either of you before containers take over the world?
Well, that's what we said. It's not going to happen.
So, perfect. Well, thank you, Arun, for joining. Thank you, Sujay, for all of your comments as usual. So that was a great show.
Yep, and now, Adrian, it's the end of our second week for the contest which we are running. So our online contest, we call it the HPE Helion app, has challenged you to build applications running on HPE Helion Stackato. So you receive an awesome T-shirt just for registering, and one lucky winner chosen every week in the month of November will receive the Oculus Rift DK2. So,
Right.
Adrian.
Yes, Sujay. We have drum rolls going on for winner number 2 is Giles de Bordeaux, hailing from California, where I think it's probably less rainy than in Seattle. But congratulations, Giles. We will contact you with additional details. You get that shirt. You get the Oculus Rift developer kit. So we're really excited to see what you can pull together with that.
Yeah, and I think, Adrian, there have been some excited participants, right? Including the crew who deployed People Finder on our HPE Helion Stackato and Helion OpenStack, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
they were pretty excited. So there's a whole team of them working to deploy.
Lovely. So remember, all participants can register on our site and tweet a pic of the Stackato command, the push command, and just tag it with a hashtag HPE Helion app. That's all you have to do, and you'll get the updates and stuff which we are doing on our Twitter account. That's number two Protons.
Yep. So just keep testing out the environment. Try and deploy an app and win. We've only got 2 Oculus Rifts left, but we'll see what happens. Again, Arun, I want to say thank you again for joining us. This is really great conversation.
Thank you, Arun.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.